فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So inshallah today we're going to go back over what a little bit of review as well as a bit of points that are often overlooked when it comes to the Salah in the Mutn Abu Shujaa. And so I'll be referring to this, and I want to talk about some of the things that are sometimes are there's like mistakes that are made in Salah. And of course in this the most important things that we make sure that we're doing are all of the pillars. So I'm going to go over some of the details in some of the pillars that we went over in the last class in general, and I'll go over some details and things that are very important for someone to know when it comes to these pillars. And so this is a little bit extra when it comes to explanation of the Mutn Abu Shujaa, but it is something that is necessary for each individual to know. So I'll talk about this inshallah, and we'll go over one by one, and if there's something that's already understood, I won't necessarily talk much about it. So when he was talking about when he said Fasal Arkanu Salah Thamaniyata Ashara Ruknan, so we talked about this was 18 pillars of Salah, and also some of them, if they were to take, we talked about that stillness in each one of stillness while someone is in ruku', and stillness when they come up and they're standing, and stillness when they're in sujud. These are all he says here they're rukun, and if we were to take these out, it would be 13. And this is like in other books of the madhab, they'll talk about that there's 13 pillars, such as Minhaj, Nawawi. And so some people will say there's 13, and if you add the stillness, then it would be the 18 as he mentions here. And the only difference is when we talk about if someone's going to be behind somebody, if they somehow get held up, then they can't be. Then the 13, the 13 rukuns would say they can't be two. They can't be four behind the person, and it would be according to the 14 rukun. So it's a little bit, or 13 rukun, which is like the 13 pillars. This is a better way to talk about that particular issue. But the first one he mentions here is a niyyah, which we were talking about this. And niyyah is not something, I think I mentioned it, but it's not something that is, it's not something that you say to yourself. Like, it's not an actual sentence that you're saying, okay, I'm praying the Dhuhr prayer and I'm praying 4 rakats and this is obligatory. But rather it's something that happens inside. It's something that you know, and this happens within a lahza or a second, just like a split second. This is what the niyyah is, that you have, that you're coming and you're praying this prayer. But this isn't something that comes out with words, and the words itself is not the niyyah. And if someone was to say it, then this is in the madhab they say it's sunnah for someone to say it because it helps them with that. And this is a bigger issue in that. But in general, it's something that it's not actually something you say, and it's not something that like a sentence that you have to think about, but rather it's you knowing that you're coming and you're praying this prayer, and it's kind of just a knowing and having that intention there. So, and it happens just in a split second. And also, you have to make sure when we have the niyyah that you're intending the salah, and that you're intending which salah you're praying, and also that you're intending if it's obligatory salah, that you intend that it's that you're praying this in the obligatory fashion, or that this is an obligatory salah that you're praying. So this is what's important when it comes to the niyyah. And also, I talked a little bit about the next of these pillars, which is standing for the one who's able. Al-qiyamu ma'al-qudra. And of course, the person who's able, this ability comes, every individual is, their ability is, like a normal person who's there's no medical issues or anything, then he can pray standing, and this is something that's obligatory for him, and it's one of the pillars as he mentions here. And of course, this is for the obligatory salah. And like for someone who is in a sunnah salah, if they want to sit down, they can. But of course, it's best for them to like at least start standing when they're doing the takbir, which is the next part. And also, whoever can, like if someone is walking into the masjid and they have problems, so they want to sit during their salah. If they're walking into the masjid, they can stand for that split second to say Allahu Akbar, and then they can sit down. And if they can't stand for that split second, then they have to stand for that split second. Of course, as long as they're physically able to. But sometimes there will be people that they will come into the masjid, they'll be walking into the masjid, and then when it comes to salah, they're seated. They're seated in their chair, and even for the first takbir, they don't even stand up for that, and that's incorrect. If they're able to stand up for that, they have to stand up for it. And then the same thing, if they're able to stand for the Fatiha, then they have to stand for the Fatiha. Or if they're able to stand for half the Fatiha, then they have to stand for that half of the Fatiha until they can't stand. Of course, that ability is according to like no one should be putting themselves into like major torture or anything of that sort. But if they're able to do it even the little bit, that small amount that they're able to do doesn't fall away with the big amount that they can't do. So if the big amount that they can't do falls away, then that small amount they can do is still obligatory on them. And this is a major principle that comes in fiqh. Al-maysur la yaskutu bil ma'sur. And so like the thing that you're able to do doesn't fall away with what you can't do, but rather that still stays there. And so also when it comes to the next of these, when he talks about takbiratul ihram, the opening takbir, this is something that is easy, but it's Allahu Akbar. And there's some things that some people should be careful. Of course, I think I mentioned in the last class, no one should be saying Akbar. Like this is wrong. And this actually, like in the Shafi'i madhab, the salah would be invalid because the person did not say Allahu Akbar. Like Akbar is another word completely. So he never actually did the takbir. He was doing something else, and he was saying something that if the person meant it, this is actually a major sin. Like if they meant the other word, which Akbar is like the plural of drum, kabr. And so like if they're saying that Allah is a bunch of drums, like this is a type of kufr, of course, if they mean it. But if they say it like they don't understand, that's something else. And this is in the takbiratul ihram. This is something that has to be for the person, the leader, like the one who's leading, the imam, as well as the people behind him. This is in every single case. The person needs to say this, and if they come later on in the salah, and the imam is in some part of the salah, and this person wants to go to the place that it is, he can't come into the salah until he says Allahu Akbar for this takbiratul ihram, and he has to say this one first, and then he can go to whatever part of the salah that he wants after that. And if like the imam said Allahu Akbar to that place, then he can say Allahu Akbar following him. But he has to have this first one, and when he says this first takbir, then he needs to say it while he's standing. He can't be moving. So if somebody comes, they want to catch that rak'ah, and so they come and they say Allahu Akbar while they're on their way down, Allahu Akbar, and the person needs to be standing while he's saying Allahu Akbar for the takbiratul ihram. Even if he goes down to whatever place after that, he needs to at least have said Allahu Akbar while he was standing firm, and without moving into the next rukn. And so this is something sometimes people they make a mistake when it comes to this. And the other thing is if Allahu Akbar, also someone should make sure they say Allahu Akbar, and they shouldn't say Allahu Akbar or Allahu Akbar. So just saying Allahu Akbar is the important thing, and not changing any of the wording of it, and make sure that it comes across as it should be in Arabic. And so the next of the pillars is the reading of the Fatiha, Qira'atul Fatiha. And so we talked about this, that Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is an ayah from it. And this is most of the riwayat from like the Quran. Of course, there's different there's different narrators of the Quran that are like the major narrators, and that narrate the Quran in some different subtleties. So like they'll have a different reading and this different reading, and there are a few readings that they say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, but they don't. But it's not a part of the ayat with them. So in this person, if he was reading in this particular thing, then in his reading, then Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim isn't actually counted as one of the ayats from it. And so this is something that for the madhabs that say that it's not something that's obligatory for him to say, it would be something that he should do. And this is some of the difference of opinion between this and that. It goes back to the different readings of the Quran. So if the person who's reading a certain reading, such as what we learn in general, we learn Hafs and Asim, and this Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an actual ayat of it. So if we're reading in this qira'ah, then we should make sure that we always say that, because this is a part of the actual surah itself. Also, if somebody doesn't know how to recite Fatiha, then this is something that's obligatory on them to learn. And of course, this person should learn how to recite the Fatiha, and like this would be the first thing that they're learning. And anyone who teaches them Fatiha, such as anyone who is like working with the new Muslims, and they can teach one of these new Muslims Al-Fatiha, then this is of the best things that someone can do, because just think about the reward that you would have for teaching someone Al-Fatiha. Because every single salat that this person has, you're going to have a reward from them praying in their salah and for reciting Al-Fatiha, and let's say at least 17 times a day, if not more, if they're doing anything extra, and then throughout the rest of their life. Just think of that. And if this person teaches somebody this sadaqah, or like the rewards that can be from you teaching somebody Fatiha, is just immense. So this is something that's it's something that's very, very good for someone to learn. Of course, they have to learn it, but then to teach it, there's a huge reward for that. So this is something that should inspire anyone to help any new Muslim that needs to learn Fatiha, and make sure that you ask these people if they know Fatiha yet, and if they don't, then they shouldn't be ashamed to go learn it, because they got to learn it. Everyone needs to learn it. And if for whatever reason they don't have time to learn it before their next salah, then they can repeat Maliki Yawmiddin. So this is probably something that's easy. If they can repeat this 7 times, or to fill up the space for that, then pretty most people can say Maliki Yawmiddin. If they were to say this like 7 times, then this would be something. And if they can't say this, then they would say some type of dhikr. So like Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar. This is what the Prophet ﷺ, he told one of the Sahabis that came to him and said that this is hard for me, the Fatiha itself. He told him to say this. And so any of the, even if he can't say it, maybe La ilaha illallah is kind of hard on the tongue for someone who's new to Arabic. But if they can say the other ones and repeat them, the time that they're standing, especially if there's the time that they would be standing in the Fatiha, then this is what they should do in that case, until they learn. And they need to learn. And this is something, of course, the person knows how well they can learn, and this is something that's between them and Allah. But of course, like, the person needs to do everything in their power to learn the Fatiha, and this is first and foremost. And if they need to read from, like, if they have like a phone and they can have like the English transliteration or anything that helps them read it in front of them, they can hold this while they're in their salah, even while it's the obligatory salah, and this doesn't affect the validity of the salah. And in fact, like, somebody can read from a mushaf in their salah, and there's no problem with this. It doesn't affect the validity of the salah. And but it's best to avoid doing it in like obligatory salah unless there's a need, because some people have there's a difference of opinion with the obligatory salah, but for other salah there's no difference of opinion. And for the person who needs to read Fatiha and they can't do this without like a card or something to do, then they should have this card with them, or whether it's like a picture on their iPhone is what I used when I was a new Muslim, and I would just read it, and I think it was after like a week and I didn't need it anymore. And someone who repeats and they pray their prayers, and even if they're looking at that to know what they're supposed to be praying, this doesn't affect the validity of their salah. In fact, it's the thing that keeps their salah valid. So whatever they need to do to get that done, then they need to do that. And also, a couple note, every single letter from the Fatiha needs to be recited properly. Like, it needs to be that particular letter. So there are some mistakes that some people have made in some like when it comes to certain letters, such as Dod. Dod is a letter that it's a long letter. Like Dod is a long letter, and it comes from like the whole tongue coming up onto the roof of the mouth, and then releasing from the one side. So it's like a Dod. And some people, they have a mistake with this letter, and they say Lod. And they say law, so it's like kind of like a law, and so they have this kind of like slipping of the tongue when they say lawd, and so some people, they'll say wala dhalin, and this according to the madhab of Shafi'i, then their salah is invalid if they say wala dhalin. And so like they need to make sure that they say wala dhalin. When they say the dod, they need to make sure that's a dod and not a lod. And so like some people will say dha instead of dod, and this is something the madhab, they're very strict about it. And of course, like the Shafi'i madhab is of the strictest when it comes to this, to every single letter. And this is something that some of the teachers of tajweed, they will talk about, like that some of the madhabs will say that the salah is invalid if they're not reciting every letter properly. And the same thing for alladhina, siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim. Some of the people will say allazina, and they'll say z instead of the, alladhina. And so it should be alladhina and not allazina. And so this is something that people should be very careful at every single letter, because that's switching one letter with another letter. And if you're switching one letter with another letter, this is something that someone should be careful when they're reciting the Fatiha. And for people that are brand new to the Arabic language and they make like small little mistakes, they shouldn't be they shouldn't be overworked about themselves when they're doing it, but try to make sure that they're not someone who's leading other people in salah. If the other person they know can read the Fatiha properly, then this person who can read the Fatiha properly should be the one who leads. And if this person has any he doesn't know, am I reading properly or am I not reading properly, he should always have someone else. If there's a group, he should never be the one who's leading them. He should always have the person who is known to be able to read the Fatiha properly. He should always be the person who's put first and foremost before someone who maybe is going to make mistakes in some of the letters. And of course, the things that are small mistakes that somebody has, they just can't, or they're having trouble learning some of the letters. This is something that is not a huge problem. Like if someone says alhamdulillah instead of alhamdulillah with a ha, they change the ha to a ha. This is a small mistake. Like, of course, someone can fix that later on, but it doesn't change like the meaning of it. And this is like a small mistake, and someone can fix it, and then it's not going to affect it. But of course, like dha shouldn't be switched for dod. Like dod, what a dolin should be with the dod and not with a dha. And this is a mistake that some of the people, like it's very common for even Arab-speaking countries to make this particular mistake. And this happens a lot in Saudi Arabia. A lot of the people in Saudi, they will say dha instead of dod. Of course, like the actual like reciters of the Quran that are from there, they know this and they recite it properly. But a lot of the normal people, they will make this mistake. And also when then the next part, which is ar-ruku'. And so when we talk about ar-ruku', which is the bowing and whatnot, this is the level of ruku'. Like, what is the least amount of ruku' that can be considered ruku'? The least amount is for someone to bend their back to where their hands can reach their knees. Like if they were, like for someone who has a normal build, like his hands would be at the level of his knees. So sometimes, like of course, the perfect ruku' is that they're at a right angle. Where if it's mentioned in a hadith that if water was put on the back of the Prophet ﷺ, then it would stay there. It wouldn't move, because this is the level of, this is perfection. But the bare minimum is where they're bent to a point where their hands could reach their knees. If they put their hands on their knees, this is the bare minimum, and they have to be still for that period in there, as well as he said, and being still in it. But this is the bare minimum, and and where should his head be when he's doing this? His head shouldn't be like a horse, where his head is like up, and his horse and his head shouldn't be like a donkey either, like all the way down. So his head should be level. So like he shouldn't have his head like stuck up, like looking forward, and he shouldn't have his head like stuck all the way down to where it's just like dropped below his back. Rather, it should be flat. So where he's looking straight down. And like the place to look when someone is in their salah, this is something that there's no actual place that comes in the sunnah that says you should look here in this place. There's some people that say you should look to the place of sujood, and this is a suggestion, but it's not. There's no clear like evidence from the sunnah that says you should look towards the place of sujood. If you look somewhere else, then this is makruh, or if you close your eyes, that this is makruh. This is according to each person. So if the person looks somewhere that is not distracting for him, then this is good. And if he's going, say if he's in a place where there's going to be like women running and walking in front of him because he's like praying outside or something, and this is going to be distracting, he can close his eyes. There's no problem with that as long as he doesn't fear for his safety from like getting hit by something. Then it's okay for someone to close their eyes. Of course, closing their eyes is not something that's an act of worship. So like in the Christians, they see closing their eyes as a part of like the actual prayer, of the prayer being correct. They think that you need to close your eyes so that you are correct in that. And this is not something that's in Islam. But if somebody has a reason to close their eyes while they're in salah, then there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not like makruh, as long as they're not like doing this as an act of worship. As long as this is something that they're doing just because it helps them with their khushu' or something of this sort. And some of the scholars, they say it's makruh, so leaving it is better. Just to leave the difference of opinion with that, but there's no like prohibition against it, as long as someone's not following like the Jews or the Christians in how they pray, but rather they're just doing it for some other need. And so the other thing, the next thing, like standing back up, we talked about standing back up. The person needs to stand all the way up, and they can't go down until they've stood standing up and they've been still standing back up. And when somebody's coming back up, we'll talk about that they say Allah, and they say Sami'Allahu liman hamida. And when they come up and they say that, they should say Sami'Allahu liman hamida, like during the time that they're moving. They shouldn't stand up and then say Sami'Allahu liman hamida. No, they should say that when they're coming, while they're in the movement. And this is the same for all the takbir, all the saying Allahu Akbar while we're going up and down. That should be during the actual motion. And this can be a problem sometimes if some of the leaders of Salah, they'll say they'll stand up, then they'll say Sami'Allahu liman hamida because the microphone's in front of them. And this is problematic for the person behind them, because if the person was trying to catch the rak'ah and ruku', then he wouldn't know whether or not he caught the rak'ah, because he said Sami'Allahu liman hamida, he's been standing for a while. And for the person, like to go into this, for the person to catch the rak'ah with the imam, then he needs to have, like if he says someone is late to salah, and he comes in and the imam is going into ruku', and he goes into ruku'. This person, he needs to have been in ruku' at the same time that the imam is still in ruku' and hasn't left ruku'. If the imam has left ruku' before he actually gets into ruku', then that rak'ah doesn't count for him. Of course, like the act of worship doesn't get like this is all like counted for him in his scale of deeds, but like as a full rak'ah, then this is not counted for him. And so he needs to make sure that when he comes down and he finally makes the ruku', that he makes the ruku' at the same time that the imam is still in ruku'. So if the imam comes up, he stands up for a little bit and he says Sami'Allahu liman hamida while he's standing up, then this person who came down, he may not know that he got into it and he's down, and then he hears Sami'Allahu liman hamida. This person's already been standing for a while, so this could possibly create a problem for him if he thinks that his rak'ah was completed and it wasn't. So this is a mistake that some of the leaders do, and I hope that they would learn a little bit about this, because this is a serious issue that they could be affecting people's salah without understanding it. And of course, the person who doesn't know, they're not held accountable for what they don't know. But of course, the person who is leading in salah should be the most aware of the salah and how it should go. And this is in general. And of course, I'll talk about this when we say Sami'Allahu liman hamida. This happens for everybody. Like everybody says Sami'Allahu liman hamida in the Shafi'i madhab, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to pray as you have seen me pray. So anything that the Prophet ﷺ does in his prayer, then we do that unless there's something that tells us not to do it. And there's nothing that tells us not to do it, except for something that's understood from a hadith, but it's not actually said in the hadith. It's something that could be understood, and also there's difference of opinion in that. But for everyone to say Sami-Allahu liman hamida, including the person who's coming up that's following, this is, we'll talk about this, but this is the madhab of the Shafi'i madhab, is that everybody says Sami-Allahu liman hamida when they're on their way up. And so going into sujood, there's a couple things when someone is in sujood that they need to make sure that that they do while they're in sujood. And of the things that they need to make sure is that their forehead is touching the ground. Their forehead needs to be touching the ground, and that the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith when he was talking about how to pray and make sujood, he said فَمَكِّنْ جَبْهَكَ. And so that the Prophet ﷺ told him to make firm his head, like the jabha, which is like this, like the forehead, to make this firm on the ground. And the least amount there needs to be some of the forehead needs to be touching the ground, the actual ground. There can't be a barrier between it and that. Some of the forehead needs to be touching the ground, and this is the least amount for like a person, for like a man that's praying. He needs to have at least some of his head that is touching the ground. And there's like something that's common with the Somalis is they'll wear a hat, and the hat will be here, and then when they go to pray, they'll flip it up, just to make sure that all of their head comes on there. And also there's other places where you'll see that the hat is actually made to a point where it comes down and onto the side. It comes up here, and then it comes down on the side, so that they can get their head on there. Of course, as long as some of the head is touching the ground, this is what's obligatory. And anything like having the whole head, like the whole, like the forehead touching the ground, this is extra. There needs to be at least something touching from the skin, needs to be touching the ground. And that is what's obligatory for the person when they're in sujood. That's part of it. And also their hands need to be flat on the ground. Some people, they'll do this thing, and the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about this, he talked about the hands being on the ground. So the hands, like the palms of the hands, they need to be on the ground. They can't be like some people do this, and they're like, this is something that they're missing out on their sujood. Their sujood is not complete until they do this. And also their arms, when they're making sujood, they should not be on the ground like a dog. They should be up, as the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited people from prostrating like a dog with their forearms laying on the ground, but that they need to be up. And of course, the sunnah is to keep them on the side. And if they put them on the side, then they should make sure that they're never hurting somebody next to them. If they're praying in congregation, there's someone next to them, then accomplishing a sunnah of spreading out their arms is less important than not harming their neighbor. Like, not harming their neighbor takes priority here. Like, if you're going to poke somebody in their, if you're going to poke someone or make someone uncomfortable in their salah because you're trying to do a sunnah, then this is no longer sunnah anymore. Like, this is no longer sunnah. This is actually something, if you're hurting somebody, this is haram. And so this is, someone should be careful if they're ever praying next to somebody, that if them doing something that they learned was sunnah is going to harm this person, they should leave this sunnah, because this is no longer sunnah. If it's going to harm somebody, it's no longer sunnah. And so this is, yes, some of the head needs to touch, and also when their hand needs to touch, the palms need to be flat on the ground. And then of course, like facing the qibla is like the best thing. Like a little bit spread is good. And then also their toes should be on the ground. And this is also another mistake some people, they will make when they're in the sujood. And this is the reason I wanted to bring this up and give a little bit of priority to these mistakes that are made, because how this affects people's salah. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Umirtu an asjud ala sab'i idhamin," and that he says that he was commanded. The Prophet ﷺ was commanded. Of course, who's the one commanding him? Allah is commanding him to prostrate on 7 like idham, which is like, could be translated as bones, but of like certain body parts. And of these is like the hands, the face, and he pointed to his nose. So the nose also needs to be on the floor as well. And then also the hands, and then also the feet. And so the feet and the knees. And so the feet and the knees, they both need to be on the ground. And the feet themselves, of course, like the sunnah is to point the toes in the direction of the qibla. This is sunnah. But if they're not going to do this, at least the feet should be on the ground. This is the least, and like the toes should be touching the ground, unless there's like some medical disability for this person. person, or like they have something that's going to really hurt them and whatnot, okay, then this is something else. But they shouldn't have their feet up in the air. Like this is something a lot of times, so people will go into sujood and their feet will be dangling up in the air. And this invalidates the salah because they didn't make the sujood in the way that they were commanded to do, as the Prophet ﷺ was commanded by Allah to make this, and then he also said to pray as you've seen him prayed, as we've seen him pray, or like the Sahaba. So this is something we got to pray in the same manner, and this person's feet should be on the ground. Like this is the bare minimum. Pointing his toes on the ground towards the Qibla, this is Sunnah, and this is something that should be done. And this is what there's different views in the madhab of Shafi'i, and Imam an-Nawawi, he said that all of these things that I mentioned here, these are all obligatory as for someone to do. They need to make sure that their palms are flat on the ground, their feet are on the ground, their toes are on the ground, and pointing them is sunnah. And also another part of this is that when they are making sujood, they can't make sujood in like child's pose, which is like if somebody is just laying down on their knees. So they actually need to have their backside needs to be farther up than the rest of their body. So they need to have brought this up, because this is what sujood encompasses. So the backside needs to be farther up above their shoulders and their head. So that if they're down like this and they're just laying down like this, and like child's pose, as you would call it, like from like a which is like known in yoga and whatnot, like this child's pose where they're just laying on their thighs. Like this is they need to have that. They need to have their backside that's up above their front side, with their front side down. And so these are some things that are very important. Of course, if there's anything that someone can't do, then they do what they can do. You come with what you can do. And then so if someone say they wanted to put their forehead on the ground, but they have like a cut on their forehead or something, and they have a bandage on it, and the bandage stops their head from reaching, they pray as they are, and this is not something that invalidates their salah if they're not able to do it because of some medical necessity and whatnot. And Allah knows best. And when let's see if there's something else here. And also there's the person who's praying, there's never a time inside the prayer, just in a general note, there's never a time inside the prayer that someone is silent. Like this silence in prayer should always be filled with some prayer. So like if someone is waiting for the next thing, they should always be having some type of adhkar that they use, whether it's dua or something of this sort. But they shouldn't be just standing silent in prayer, because this as-salah, it means a dua, which is linguistically it means dua, which is like praying and asking Allah for things. So of course someone in all of these things, they should be always having some type of dua or adhkar that they either they learn it from like the sunnah, or it's some type of a dua that they need, or something of this sort within their salah. So they should never be standing silent. And also in the last couple ones that we talked about here, so we have the prostrating, we have the sitting between the two prostrations, and saying Rabbi Fili is sunnah in this to do it. It's not something that is obligatory according to the Shafi'i madhab. But the person needs to make sure that they're still. When they're sitting back up, they need to make sure that they're still before they go back down. And this is a big mistake that a lot of people make. Also, saying the tashahhud. If someone is a new Muslim and they can't say the tashahhud in Arabic, they can translate this. They can take a translation, and there's no problem with them translating it until they learn it in Arabic. And this is something that can be translated. The Fatiha can't be translated because the Quran can't be translated into another language. The Quran is in Arabic, and only the meaning can be taken. And so if someone if someone was to recite the meaning of this doesn't equate to Quran in any way, shape, or form. This is some of the meaning that is like a tafsir. Like this is what you would say, it's like a tafsir or an explanation of the Quran, but it's not Quran. But as opposed to like the tashahhud or any of the other adhkar, they can be, as long as it's not Quran, it can be translated. So if someone wanted to have a translation of the tashahhud, and they use the translation while they're a new person, this is fine. This is good, and their salat is valid, and this is mentioned in the Shafi'i madhab. until this person learns Arabic, then there's no problem with them translating, even if it was Allahu Akbar. So if they said Allah is the greatest, all right, this is totally fine, or Allah is the greater, or Allah is greater, something of this sort. This would still enter them in, but it's still it's rare to find somebody who can't learn Allahu Akbar. Like this is very easy for someone to learn, but if someone didn't know, they could say the translation for that, and they would still start their salah, and their salah would be valid. And this is the view of the madhab Shafi'i. And so I think we went over most of the things that I mentioned at the end of saying Assalamu alaikum, making sure that someone has the Assalam when they say the alif and lam for ta'rif. They would need to have this when they say Assalamu alaikum, and they can't just say Salamu alaikum without that S. They need to have Assalamu alaikum. And of course, I'm going overboard in making sure that it's heard for people. But sometimes people will make it really small. But as long as it's there, that's the important thing. Because it's when you're saying it in Arabic, it needs to be as like some of these adhkar that are a rukun. They need to be said in Arabic as they are in Arabic, because it could be changing the meaning from that without it, or it's not narrated in that way. So, as I mentioned in the last class, I mentioned that we're going to move on to the next part here, and there's different ways that the salah is broken down into different pieces. And so as we mentioned, the first thing we mentioned are conditions, which is this would be like shurut, or shart is one and shurut is the plural. But these are the conditions for the salah, and some of them are such as like having, as we talked about, tahara, which is the purity of the body needs to be pure from the state of impurity, like of hadith. It needs to have made wudu, and also the body needs to be pure from things on it. And these are something that's not necessarily salah itself, but rather it's a condition for salah. So these are the shurut. And then there's also arkan, and arkan, or pillars. Or rukun is a singular for that in Arabic. But we have the pillars, and the pillars are something that have to be there, and they're what the salah is built upon. And so all of these things have to be there. If any of them fall out, then the salah is invalid. All of these pillars need to be there. And then he also talks, the next thing he says was sunanuha an qabla dukhul fiha. He talks about the Sunnan. And I mentioned in the last class that the Sunnan are, and here they're mentioned as Sunnan, but there's something that some of the Sunnan, and here in the Mutn Abu Shujaa, he mentions Sunnah. And what he means by Sunnah is something that is not a rukun, but it's still something that needs to be done. And if you don't do it, then you would do the sujood sahw for it. And so these things that he mentions here, they're also called in the madhab ab'ad. And ab'ad is like parts. And if you were to make an analogy of the difference between the arkan and the shurut, and also the ab'ad, and also we have the hayat, which are the sunan, which are something that is extra, then you would say that like the shurut or the conditions is like for a person, like life is for a person. So this person, for them to be alive, they need to have these things, like life for themselves, for that person. And then the arkan are like the actual limbs of that person, like the limbs and like his head and all of his body parts. They need to be there. And then the ab'ad would be like some of the things, such as like a ear. If it was missing, there would be a problem, but like the person's still a person. Like if I'm missing a finger or something, I'm still a person, but like I'm missing something that's important. These would be like the ab'ad, would be like if I'm missing an ear, or I'm missing like part of a lip or something. This is something that should be there, and but if it's missing, this person's still a person. He's still valid. And then the hayat are like the hair. So like a person, if they have hair, great, they have it and it's beautiful and it makes them beautiful. But if they don't have it, they're still a person. There's nothing nothing wrong with the person, and as opposed, like they're healthy and whatnot. And so this is like an analogy for these different aspects, and that someone can look back to see how the salah is broken into. And so the next thing he's talking about Sunan. And the first one he says here is, he says, وَسُنُنُهَا قبل الدخول فيها شيئان الأذان والإقامة. So he says in the Sunnan, or like the Sunnah actions, there's 2 Sunnah actions to do before entering the prayer. قبل الدخول فيها. And so, and then the first one he says here, al-adhan, which is making the adhan, and the iqamah. And so these are the 2 Sunnah actions that are that someone should do before coming into the prayer. And of course, this doesn't invalidate, if someone doesn't do it, it doesn't invalidate their salah. They're missing out on a reward. And when it comes to like the area that they're in, then this is something that's fardul kifaya. And so he says sunnah here, but it's fardul kifaya for someone to do for in the area, for them to make the adhan. This is something that's fardul kifaya, because the Prophet ﷺ, before, when he was going out and waging war in Arabia, before he would go and actually attack like a lot of times the time he would attack is right in the Fajr time. Before he would go and attack the place, he would wait first, and he would listen for this village. He would listen first. Are they making adhan? If they made adhan, then they're like, these are Muslims, and of course he's not going to attack Muslims. But if they don't make adhan, then they would be fought, because it's apparent that they're not Muslims. And so, of course, this is something that is of the Shara'i al-Islam. That this is something that is of the most the things that Islam is known by, the adhan. So this is something that at least someone needs to be holding up, this very important part of Islam, which is the adhan, of course, which Islam is encompassed in the adhan. Like, of course, the shahada, and hearing of the greatest things that we're doing is calling people to worship Allah in the prayer, which is like the greatest pillar of Islam after entering it. And so, of course, the adhan is something that should be done, and then there's different ways to do it, and of the different ways that are known for it is for someone to say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So they have this 2 times, and then here. Then they can do one of 2 things. Either they can say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and they can say this out loud. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah. And then they can say this right away. And so this is straight to the point. So and we have the Allahu Akbar 4 times, and then the Shahada, the Shahadatain gets repeated twice. And then with each of the parts of it, and then we go straight into Hayya ala salah 2 times, Hayya ala falah 2 times, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. So this is the adhan. But there's another way to do it that was also narrated from the Prophet ﷺ that he taught one of the Sahabis to do, and he taught them, it's called tarjih, which is when they say Allahu Akbar the first times, then before they say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, they say this silently. So they'd say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Then they would say silently under their breath, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. And then they would say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and then they would say this out loud afterwards. So they would say it under their breath. They would say the 2 times each for Ashhadu an, I don't know if you heard me, but Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and they would say this twice under their breath first, and they would say twice still under their breath the Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Then they would say it out loud. And they would finish it out as it is. This is called tarjih, and this is something that is a part of the sunnah. And for a mu'adhin, he should do both of these if he can. Like sometimes do it this way and sometimes do it this way, because both of these are narrated. One is narrated from Bilal without the tarjih, and another one is narrated as well with the tarjih, which is like the saying it under the breath. So doing both of these is definitely something that is good for someone to do. Of course, they don't do it at the same time. Like one adhan would be this way and one adhan would be the other way. And of course, with the addition after at the end of like Hayya ala al-falah for Fajr, they would say as-salatu khayrun minan nom. They would say this as-salatu khayrun minan nom. Then they would go into Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. And so then they would exit it with that, but they would add the as-salatu khayrun minan nom. And this is for the Fajr Salah in particular. And this is just a little bit about the adhan. Of course, someone being in a state of wudu, it's sunnah for them to be in a state of wudu when they're making this, and to be standing when they're making it, and facing the qibla, and then moving side to side with the hayya ala salah and hayya ala falah, going back and forth this way and this way and this way and this way, or some people say this way for both of them, and this way, and also putting the fingers inside the ears. This is also a sunnah that Bilal used to do, radiyallahu anhu. And the person who hears the adhan, and the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِذَا سَمِعْتُمُ الْمُؤَذِّنَ فَقُولُوا مِثْلَ مَا يَقُولُ ثُمَّ صَلُّوا عَلَيَّ فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ صَلَّى عَلَيَّ صَلَاةً صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ بِهَا عَشْرًا. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he says here, إِذَا سَمِعْتُمُ الْمُؤَذِّنَ, if you've heard the mu'adhin, like if you've heard the mu'adhin when he's giving the adhan, then فَقُولُوا مِثْلَ مَا يَقُولُ, so say like he says. And this in general we'd always repeat what he says, except for the part where he says hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah, we'd say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, because this is narrated in a hadith to say this in this particular place. And then he says, then the Prophet ﷺ, he said here, ثُمَّ صَلُّوا عَلَيَّ. Then he says, then send صَلُّوا عَلَيَّ, which means like send the salah upon the Prophet ﷺ. And then he gives a very good incentive here in this hadith. He says, فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ صَلَّى عَلَيَّ صَلَاةً. And he says, whoever prays one of these salah for the Prophet ﷺ, then Allah will pray this, or like will bless this person with 10 times of that. So if you're asking Allah for this for the Prophet ﷺ, one time, you saying sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah will give you that blessing 10 times in return. So of course this is of the blessings of when someone says sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioned, saying this is a way that they can get a lot of barakah in their life, and that Allah will mention them. And this salah, when it is mentioned, this is Allah mentioning the Prophet ﷺ in the highest ranks, and him praising the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and sending blessings upon him. And so of course this is of the benefits for us to do this. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says here after that, and he says ثُمَّ سَلُوا اللَّهَ لِي الْوَسِيلَةِ. And then he says, then ask Allah for me al-wasila, which is the place. And he says here, فَإِنَّهَا مَنْزِلَةٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ. This is a place in Jannah, the high rank in Jannah. لَا تَنْبَغِي إِلَّا لِعَبْدٍ مِّنْ عِبَادِ اللَّهِ وَأَرْجُو أَنْ أَكُونَ أَنَا هُ. And he says, and this is not appropriate except for one of the worshippers of Allah, and I hope that I am that one. And of course, this is something that Allah has promised him for that. And so this particular asking for this thing for the Prophet ﷺ comes in another hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ, he gives this narration that someone should say when they hear the adhan, Allahumma rabba hadihi ad-da'wati at-tamma was-salati al-qa'ima ati Muhammadan al-wasila wal-fadila wab'athu maqaman mahmudan alladhi wa'adtahu. And so whoever says this, then the person will have the shafa'ah they'll have the shafa'ah of the Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. And this is something that someone should always make sure after they hear the adhan, that they say this very important dua afterwards. And this is something that is sunnah for someone to do. And so this is just a little bit of the ahkam, or like the rulings regarding adhan. And of course this is of the greatest things of Islam that people are known by, and there's been people who enter Islam just by hearing the adhan, because it's very powerful for that. And it's definitely of the most beautiful parts of Islam. And so when they're giving the adhan, of course they should have a nice voice, and also they shouldn't go overboard in some of stretching certain parts of the adhan that go away from like the rules of tajweed. In general, they should stick to the rules of tajweed. And sometimes people, when they say the lam, when they say they'll say illah, and sometimes they'll say illallah, but they'll make the lam a nun, and this is like switching. This is playing with the adhan. And also someone should be mindful that they stay within the general rulings of ahkam of tajweed, like the rulings of tajweed when they're reciting the adhan. Of course, it's not as it's not the same as like the Quran. The Quran has to be in the way that it was recited, but in general, they shouldn't be changing any words from the adhan. They shouldn't be changing any words, and they shouldn't be changing any letters, or like changing the letters in any major way. And so also the person who's listening to the adhan, if he's like in a state of janaba, then like this is something, or if he's doing something if he's in like a bathroom, say, then he can repeat this after he's done with his business. He can repeat what he heard when he's done with his business, and that's something he can do this afterwards when he's outside of that place. But if he heard it, he can still do that, and he just makes it up afterwards. And so also when he mentions the and the iqamah, and the iqamah is like the adhan. A lot of times they're mentioned as they're mentioned together as adhan, which is like two adhans. And so like the iqamah is also like the adhan, but of course it doesn't get the same number. So it'd be Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah one time, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah one time, Hayya ala salah one time, Hayya ala al-falah one time, Qad qamati salah, Qad qamati salah, Allahu Akbar. This is two times, La ilaha illallah, and this is one time. So this is the way that the iqamah should be. This is the format that it should be in. Some people they will add extra times to this, but this is the madhab of Shafi'i when it comes to the iqamah, and a lot of times this is what you'll hear mostly from most of the people. But some people they'll add like multiple times, and so they make it just like the adhan, except that they add qad qamati salah, and they'll add this part, but it'll basically be the adhan. But this is like one time. To have these things that are one time, this is what's narrated from the Prophet ﷺ with what he ordered the mu'adhin to do. And so then the next thing is we talked about, here's two sunnah actions to do before entering the prayer. And there's two sunnah actions to do as well after entering the prayer. And so he says here, وَبَعْدَ الدُّخُولِ فِيهَا شَيْئَانِ التَّشَهُدُ الْأَوَّلُ. And then he says here, وَالْقُنُوتُ فِي الصُّبْحِ. And so the first one that he mentioned here, there's two sunnah actions to do after entering the prayer. The first is the tashahhud al-awwal. And so this sunnah is also what I mentioned before, that it's broken into ab'ad, or like this would be like a ba'd. And this is something that is a part of the salah. And so it's something, the reason that he separates this from a rukun is because the Prophet ﷺ, he stood up and missed this before, and he didn't go back to it. And he made sujood sahu for the tashahhud. And so if something else can stand at its place, then it's not a rukn. It's not something that the whole salat goes away with someone missing it. But rather this is something that can be made up for with sujood sahu afterwards. And so this takes a different ruling. But it's still something someone should do, and they should never leave it on purpose. This is something that they're called to do, and they should do this, and they should never leave it on purpose. As I mentioned, it's like the fingers of a person, as opposed to like the actual like body himself. And so this is something that the person should have. They should always do the tashahhud. And he says here al-awwal, which is the first tashahhud. This is the one that is done in the second rak'ah if the person is doing more than two rak'ahs. And so this is something that is called for him to do. And also after he does this, then he should also say, so when he's done, وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. This is something that he should also add to this as well. And then he should not make this, then going on to the rest of this and making it long, this is against the sunnah. The sunnah is for it to be a short period of time. And this is what's narrated from the Sahaba, that they would sit very short period of time for that first tashahhud. It would only be for the time of the tashahhud itself. And then also the scholars of Shafi'i, they also say in sending salam or salah on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. it. And so like having just this part, and then the person would stand up after this. This is something that is a ba'd, or it's of the ab'ad of the salah. And it's he says here sunnah because he brings it down because he doesn't want to say it's we don't necessarily say wajib and then rukn. So like here in the Shafis, they would say this is a ab'ad, which is like the equivalent of a wajib when it comes to the like the Hanbali madhab, for instance, that the person needs to do it, and if they leave it on purpose, then they've committed a sin. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And then the next thing he says here, of these things, and he says, "Wal kunutu fi subh," and he says, and also and kunut, and he says here, "Fi subh wa fi al-witr fi al-nisf al-thani min shahr al-Ramadan." And so then he says here, and the second one of these two ab'ad, or these sunnah actions, is kunut. And kunut is standing up after the ruku', after someone comes up from the ruku' and raising their hands and saying, Allahumma hdini fi man hadait, wa afini fi man hadait. And so in this dua that is known, that people will say this, and oftentimes it's done in witr, but this is also the madhab of Shafi'i, this is also the time for this, is after at the second rak'ah of Fajr, the person would do this in the second rak'ah of Fajr. And this is something that's narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, that he used to do this in Fajr, and he didn't leave this until the time that he passed away. And a lot of the scholars, this is something that is something that is known from the Shafi'i madhab, and it's something the Shafi'i madhab is well known for doing this. And if somebody does, but all of the other madhabs, for the most part, they say that this was something that's abrogated, and it's not something that's done every single subh, but rather it's only done in the times of if there's a calamity that befalls the Muslims, then in this case they would do this. And this is not specifically for Fajr, but it's for all of them. But a lot of the scholars, when they look at the hadith, there's hadith that here are clear that the Prophet ﷺ did this, and he did it until the time that he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So because of this is something that it's prescribed, and if somebody does leave it for whatever reason, then they're not like committing a sin, and Allah knows best. This is not something that someone should ever get in arms about with other people. And of course, if it's going to cause any fitna, this is something. But of course, in this day and age, when we have like the war that's going on in Palestine, this is a time in general for someone to do this in any of Salah, is to have the qunut at the end of the Salah, and then they would pray against the enemies of Islam and whatnot. They would pray against them and ask Allah to curse them and to overcome them and put them under the power of the Muslims and whatnot. And this is something that happens within this qunut. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to pray this qunut when something befell, some type of calamity befell the Muslims, and he would pray against even individuals inside of that. And so this is something that is prescribed, and this happens outside of this particular time. Here he has this time here, but this is something that can happen as that's a sunnah outside this time. So he gives two times here for the qunut. One is every Fajr, so it's every single Fajr at the second rak'ah after he stands up from the rak'ah, then you would have this qunut. And then the second time here is the witr prayer at the last half of Ramadan. So at the last half of Ramadan, the witr prayer, this is also a time that they should do this. And what's understood from the madhab, the view of the madhab, is if the person leaves this, then he would make sujood sahwi for leaving it. And of course, this is the view of the madhab that none of the other, like the madhabs that I know of, say that this obligates someone to make sujood after their salah, or like that the person needs to make sujood after their salah to make up for this. Well, this is something that comes from the Shafi'i madhab, and Allah knows best. And the next thing that the author here he talks about is he goes into the things that beautify the prayer. And I'm gonna without going into an explanation very much, I'll just talk about. I'll just read here what he says, because I know time is getting short here. He says, وَهَيْئَتُهَا خَمْسَةَ عَشْرَ خَصْلَةً. So he says there's 15 things that beautify the prayer, and these are called hayat. Like I mentioned, the hayat are sunnah, and it's also like we would say the hair of an individual if we were to liken the prayer to a person. And he says there's 15 of these. The first is raising the hands. And when does this happen? This happens at these 3 times he mentions here. With the opening takbir, when we say Allahu Akbar. And so these would come up and they'd be raised. And they say raising at the same time as the person says Allahu Akbar. So when they Allahu Akbar. And they were coming down. And when bowing, when they go into bowing, they would raise their hands while they're bowing. And then when they're coming up from it, they would raise their hands while coming up from it, and placing the right hand on top of the left. This is the next one that is mentioned here. So they put the right hand on top of the left, whether it's like this, or whether it's on top of it like this way, or this, like the yed in Arabic. It goes all of this is yed, but like in general, this is also okay. Or if someone wants to put it this way, grabbing it, I don't know of any like narration for that, but like having it on this way, wherever they put their hand on top of their left hand, and even if they put their hand up on their chest or they put it down, like there's no place that is actually specified in any authentic hadith. There are some hadiths that talk like below the navel, and these are weak hadiths, but it doesn't necessarily negate that that's not okay to do. Like all of these things, when there's no hadith that tells exactly where someone should do it, they can do it anywhere in there, and there's no problem with that. But no one should ever put their hands on their hips. Like that is prohibited to do when they're in their salah. And so placing the right hand on top of the left, this is something that's sunnah here he mentions, and also saying the opening supplication. And there's different opening supplications. Some of them start with وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. So this is one of the dua that is mentioned to say when someone is starting up their salah. And there's also other ones as well that are mentioned that are shorter. And this would be the first thing after someone comes in and says their opening takbir. And then after that, he says here, and then the isti'adha, which is A'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim. And this is always to be said before someone starts in reciting the Quran. In general, this is something that someone would say before starting the Quran. And then reciting the Quran out loud in its time. So this is something that's sunnah. Making it out loud. So like reciting with your actual voice in the time that it's in its time. And its time, of course, is any time in general. The reciting out loud happens anytime that the sun is not out. Then this is the time that is that we would recite out loud. And if the sun is out, then we recite silently, with the exception of Juma and Eid. And so these are like the 2 times that we'd be reciting out loud without that. But in general, if the sun is out, then we recite silently. If the sun is not out, then we recite out loud. And that's the normal. And this actually goes for the sunnah as well. So like the sunnah, if someone was praying sunnah like Maghrib or something, as long as they're not gonna, if they're praying in like the masjid, so for them to pray out loud in the masjid when everyone else is right next to them, it's best for them to be silent so that they don't create any disturbance for other people. But if they're in their home or something, then praying out loud is also a sunnah, and Allah knows best. And then he goes here, and he's going to go into a few more, but I'll hold it for here, and we'll take these in the next class, inshallah. Are there any questions about what we went over?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
If the imam or if you're praying behind the imam and he recites the Fatiha out loud, do you have to recite the Fatiha to yourself?
Yes, this is a great point. Every person needs to be reciting the Fatiha. Everybody. There's no exceptions. Everyone recites the Fatiha. And this is because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La salata liman lam yaqra bi al-kitab," or bi Fatihatil kitab. The Prophet ﷺ said, "There's no salah for the person who doesn't recite with the Fatiha." And also in another hadith, when people were reciting alongside the imam, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Don't do this except with the Fatiha." So he made the exception for the Fatiha because this is something that needs to be done. And then he says, because there's no salah for the person who does not recite with it. And so with these hadiths, it's understood that the Fatiha needs to be recited in all cases, with the imam or when you're by yourself or behind the imam. This needs to be done in all these cases. Of course, this is a big area of difference of opinion. This is the view of the Shafi'i, and inshallah, that's the strongest of the opinions.
Can you recite along with him silently?
Anytime you recite, yeah. As long which the recitation and all of the adhkar that needs to be done, like that is a rukun, it needs to be done in a way that you make yourself hear it. So like if you're whispering and it's in a way that if there was no sound around you, you can hear yourself saying it. This is what's required of you.
Okay. So you
So
can do it along with
it's,
him. You don't have to
yeah.
wait till he's
You
finished.
can do it along with them. If you wait until afterwards, this is okay. And sometimes the imam will give a space for someone to recite the Fatiha. They'll give that space. This isn't sunnah. Like there's no like something from the Quran that or there's nothing from the sunnah that says that the Prophet ﷺ had like a waiting period between this. But a lot of times they'll do this just so the person can recite, and Allah knows best with that waiting period. But if you want to recite after he finished it, or if you want to recite alongside of him, all of this is fine, inshallah.
Okay. If you're with a group of brothers and nobody hears the adhan, but you know it's adhan time to pray or whatever, is it obligatory for somebody in that group to give the adhan, not just rely on the electronics?
Electronics are not adhan. Electronics are not adhan. Recordings are not adhan, and they don't take the ruling of it. So if you do hear adhan going off in someone's recording phone, you're not required to repeat to him the adhan. And this is like the adhan comes from an actual person. So the sunnah for you guys would be to make the adhan. For someone to make the adhan before you pray, and of course you can make it at any time. When you know the time comes, someone can just make the adhan outside, and then you all know. Of course, in a way that works with you. But yeah, this would, in the group that you're around, this would be the person, or every single masjid, they would make the adhan for that, for like that area.
Okay. And if you don't physically hear it, then somebody in the group should do it. Like
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
good to do.
physically
Yeah,
hear it from
yeah.
somebody.
Someone from the group should do it beforehand.
And kunut, can that be in the could that be in your mother tongue, or is it required to be in Arabic?
The general principle, and it can be in your mother tongue if you don't know Arabic. That's the general principle in the Shafi'i madhab. If you don't know Arabic, you can do it in your mother tongue. But it should be kept to, it shouldn't be outside of, it shouldn't be talking about other things a lot. You shouldn't go into a lot of details about other things. So keeping it general, or like if it's a translation of an actual, like if it's a translation of an actual dua, then this is okay. If it's something that you know that it's not going to be anything that is like against the Sharia, or anything that's going to be like iffy in that, then stick with that. But yeah, this is okay. And this also goes for all of the prayers in any place of the prayer. You can pray in your original tongue, and there's no problem with that. Like when you have your dua for Allah, but try not to go into like certain details. It's best to go with the things that are general, like the general dua that come in the Quran, the Sunnah. These are, of course, the greatest, most encompassing dua. But going into like immense details, like saying so and so, I want so and so to do this, that, and the other for me, or this, that, and the other, and like going into details is this could be a problem. But keeping it general and whatnot, and if it's like a translation of a dua, there's no problem with that for someone who doesn't know Arabic.
Okay, but if you
Allahu
do
a'lam.
know the Arabic, you should do the
You
Arabic.
should do it, yeah, and you should try to stick to what's narrated. Of the different dua that are narrated or that have good meanings, then this is the best to stick to. And of course, like there's nothing that says you can't have dua outside of that, but it needs to make sure that the meanings never go against something that is in the Sharia. Yeah.
Okay. Brother Akil, do you have questions?
I do have one question. So getting down to the very basics, during Salah, we recite two surahs. The first one is Al-Fatiha, and then the second one, I've heard different opinions that it's either one of your choice or it has to be a specific surah.
It's always one of your choice. There's sometimes the second one. The second one, It's something that you choose, and there's nothing that like forces you to do one or the other. And in general, like reciting a surah is what is like sunnah, like a full sunnah, a full surah. But if you do part of a surah, there's no problem with that. And this is something that the person can choose. There's not a. There's sometimes that there's certain surahs that are sunnah in certain places, such as like for the Fajr Salah, or like for the Sunnah of Fajr, like before praying the Fajr, the obligatory one. The Sunnah is to pray in the Sunnah Salah, is to pray with Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun. This is the first rak'ah, and then the second rak'ah, Qul Huwallahu Ahad. For the second rak'ah, this is something that's sunnah, and also this is also sunnah for Maghrib, and there's a couple other places that this is sunnah to recite with these surahs, but it's not obligatory.
Okay, I understand. And going back what you said, I didn't know this, but you can recite part of a surah. You don't have to recite like an entire surah.
Yeah, and some people, a lot of times people recite, like if someone wants to recite from Surah Al-Baqarah, it's going to be very hard for them to finish it in the time that the people are praying. So a lot of times people will just pick out a couple, like maybe half a page or maybe a page or something from that. And some of the imam, or like some of the imams, they will recite through the whole Quran with people. Like I have the imam that's here in Egypt. He's like 2/3 of the way through the Quran right now. And he started from the beginning, and he's just been reciting all the way through, just like a couple pages. And so, of course, he can't finish a surah in a single salah. Like some of the larger surahs, he can't finish them in a salah. It takes like 30, 40 minutes, to read them. So, of course, it's going to be broken up. And this is, a lot of people, they said there's no problem with someone doing that. And Allah knows best. Of course, the sunnah is to pray with the actual full surah. This is the sunnah. But if somebody does this is not something that is like is not something that's wrong or anything.
I see, I understand.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير.